All right, training is about Scrum Agile Process, and I'd like to acknowledge that Chris has a lot of experience in this area, so feel free to add in, if you find that there's content that you find useful to share. Okay, so from the beginning. So the idea behind Scrum Agile is Agile Manifesto, whereby individuals and interactions over process and tools. So we don't want to get bogged down in process and tools. We want to be more concerned about interactions between the various roles within the Scrum process. We want to emphasize working product versus comprehensive documentation. So we want to, not be too carried away with the documentation. We just want to produce, focus on producing good quality product. Responding to change versus following the plan. We want the process to be flexible so that we can cope with changes in the complexities of a project as opposed to be too rigid. So a lot of it has to do with flexibility. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So again, we emphasize engagement with the stakeholders throughout the process rather than in the traditional process where we only engage at the beginning and the end. So I'll go more into it as I elaborate on the process. Okay, traditional process, as you know, this is kind of waterfall process where we have fixed phases within the project where you can't get to the next phase until you finish the last phase, requirements, design, development, and testing. So what happens is once you lock down the requirements, this process, the traditional process, doesn't allow you to go around changing. The flexibility is not built in. So this is in contrast to a Scrum Agile process, which looks like this, whereby we have sprints, and throughout the sprint, what we are working on are incremental releases of the product. Whatever work we're trying to produce, we want to have something that we can release at any point. It's kind of completed set of features, and we keep adding features onto it. And the benefit of this, of course, we have the flexibility of tailoring the process along the way. We have the flexibility of getting feedback from the stakeholders, which is very important in the Scrum process. So this is just a high-level view of the differences between Scrum and the traditional way. So what I want to share with you guys today is how Scrum can give us maximum value for the business, maximum value, as well as share with you the process of how it's done in industry, so you can more or less have an idea how the process can be applied to deliver this highest value for the minimum time for a project. So some of the features of the Scrum process is it minimizes risk through project schedule. As we deliver it incrementally, you can see that the risk is reducing because we know certain things have been taken care of up front. This risk reduction. The other thing is team self-assigned based on priority. That is where team members, they are empowered to assign themselves the role because they are typically subject matter experts. So they are responsible for estimating the work as well as working together as a team to determine how the work should be done. So it's empowerment for the team, which is what leads to better efficiency, productivity. Product backlog can change over time. So flexibility is one of the main features of Scrum Agile process compared to traditional process. So this is an overview of what you get out of this process. So this chart shows how the traditional process versus the Scrum process in terms of risk. The red line is where you don't really see the finished product until you arrive at the end. Therefore, you can see the risk is high all the way to the end. In the case of the Scrum Agile process, you can see that as the high priority features are being delivered at the beginning, you get a big jump in risk reduction. And as we go along the project, we work on the lower priority, and towards the end. So you can see that the risk profile is a lot more attractive to the stakeholders of the project. This chart shows the other way around, what is getting delivered in the project. In the traditional project, nothing really gets delivered until the very end. However, in the Scrum Agile process, we get chunks of features delivered. Any of these, ideally, in an ideal situation, we want something that can be released to the customer. So, for example, if you want to compress the deadline, maybe month number 4, we can deliver something containing most of the features, which is something that the traditional process doesn't allow us to get. So these are all the various a high-level view of what the Scrum framework involves. So what you can see here are the roles in a Scrum team: the product owner, the team, the Scrum Master. What you can see here, the processes within the Scrum framework, which is the sprint planning meeting, the daily stand-ups, the sprint review, and the sprint retrospective. Also, you can see the artifacts such as the product backlog, the sprint backlog, the burn down chart, and the finish work, the work that's been produced throughout the sprint. So I'll run through all these various components. So the Scrum Agile process has the role of the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the Scrum team. The roles are described as in the slide here. Product owner is responsible for the business end of the project, so he knows what's the business value and the priorities of all the items on the backlog. So he will advise the team what to build. He advise the team, what is of value, so that the team will consult the product owner on prioritization of the task. The team member are typically subject matter experts who are responsible for knowing how to build the work, how to get the work done, and how to deliver the work. The Scrum Master is responsible for how the team works together, and is responsible for facilitating the process and improving the process. So he will ensure how the team members and the product owner work together within the Scrum Agile process. Okay, so the Scrum Agile process has a thing called product backlog. The product backlog is essentially the scope of work required for the project, and the various items within the backlog are called product backlog items, which is basically in Jira, just Jira items essentially. And it could be anything. If it's a software project, it could be software task. If it's a systems project, it could be systems task. It could be bugs, defining requirements. It could be technical work. It could be knowledge acquisition. So it could be any category of work for a given project. So the sprint contract. So at the beginning of the sprint, what happens is the product owner, which could be the engineering manager or the person or the product owner, has a meeting with the team whereby they agree upon the scope of a particular sprint. So the thing that are fixed in a sprint is the time, how long is the sprint has been agreed upon, what items to be taken from the product backlog to be worked upon will be proposed by the team to the product owner. The quality of work, so there would be a definition of done, which is kind of agreed upon set of standards of which all the work items will be delivered. And the cost, which is how big is the team, how much time is allocated for each sprint. So all these are agreed upon, and essentially within the sprint contract, there will be an agreement on how much work is to be done by the team, and what's really important, the priority items to be taken from the product backlog to be worked on, which defines the scope for a particular sprint. So the activities, the flow goes like this. There's a sprint planning, there's a daily scrum, a sprint review, sprint retrospective, and product backlog refinement. So I'll run through one by one. Sprint planning is the beginning where the product owner and the team gets together, they discuss the scope, what are the important items to be taken from the backlog, what will be worked on, all the various parameters that I described in the previous slide. Daily Scrum, as you know, is a 15-minute stand-up meeting all the Scrum team members will just talk about what was done the last 24 hours, what they're expecting to do the next 24 hours, and any impediments to what they're doing. So everybody is aware the status of their overall project, so they can, if there's any impediments, the Scrum Master will take it up to help to resolve by working together with the team outside of the daily Scrum meeting or the stand-up meeting. And the sprint review. Sprint review is the meeting that occurs at the end of the sprint, where all the work that has been done within the sprint is being presented to the stakeholders, to the product owner, so that we can close off the items, we can get feedback on whether the work has been accomplished to a satisfactory quality. We can just basically get feedback from the stakeholders and the product owner. Sprint retrospective, that's the stage where towards the end of the sprint, the team gets together and talk about what went well, what didn't go well, work on whatever that needs improving. It could be a process, it could be something got stuck. So the team gets together to figure out what process improvements can be taken, adopted, taken, actions can be assigned to be taken up. Product backlog refinement. So that's the part where every sprint we go through, we want to look at the product backlog that's remaining. We want to see if anything has changed. We could be questioning the priorities. Some of the things are no longer relevant, maybe removed from the list. Maybe there's new items to be added as we discover the scope, while we perform the work. So product. Yes, so the product backlog refinement is where we look at the scope and the other thing I wanted to mention, product backlog refinement is where initially the granularity of the work might be high granular, very coarse. So as we determine better understanding of the work, we would like to define more of the subtasks and break down the work a little bit further so that we improve the granularity of the tasks in the product backlog. Okay, so here's a summary of the process. Product owner decides what should be produced. That's a responsibility of the product owner. Dev team decides how to produce, how much it can produce in a sprint, because they know how to do the work. So they are responsible for the estimates and advising everybody how much effort, how much cost is going to be involved in producing the work. Scrum Master is the process owner, so he facilitates and ensures there's people are working together per the process to deliver the work. Product backlog is emergent. So product backlog is essentially the list of work items to be that represent the scope of work, and emergent implies it can change with time. So this is what benefits of the agile process. The product backlog can be changing with time. You can add new items, reprioritize items, increase the granularity of the items, and so on. So it's a live sort of thing, the product backlog. Sprint backlog is the block of work that's removed from the product backlog, and the team focuses on the sprint backlog during a sprint process. So the goal of each sprint is to produce a potentially shippable product. That's one of the things, when you end the sprint, we want something that we can potentially deliver to the customer. And for every sprint, there is a definition of done, specifies what level of quality that all the items have to comply to. And at the end of the sprint, the Scrum team inspects and adapts the product. So it looks at what work has been done, gets feedback from the stakeholders, and from there, they look at how the product can be improved. So this one is a sprint review, which is the process I described earlier, and this is just an interesting graph where you can see the traditional method. You only have engagement at the beginning and towards the end. This is engagement with the product owner. While with the Scrum process, you constantly, during every sprint, you're engaging with the product owner. So that's where we have the benefit of gaining the confidence of the of the stakeholders that the work is being done. Sprint retrospective, yes. So this is where the team gets together, talk about what went well, what didn't go well. Maybe there could be some behaviors, or maybe there could be some equipment not set up properly, and so on. So we have to figure out what can be done. Maybe document something on the wiki so that the next time around we don't get stuck in the process. Maybe have a discussion about how team members can work together, so there's less impediments in terms of team dynamics the next time around. All the various ways that we can improve the process. This meeting is dedicated for that purpose. Product backlog refinement, I think I already described that part. The product backlog refinement is one of the meetings that occurs at the end of the sprint, where we look at how we can create, how we can estimate, how we can prioritize the items, so that what we have, we scrub through all the items and try to clean it up and make it more useful for the next sprint. Product backlog, I've gone through this already. High priority items at the top, low priority items at the bottom. High priority items, typically we want it to have finer granularity, because that's where we're picking up the work items from to be focus of the next sprint. So we have to make sure this bit has a lot of detail. This bit is probably cost. So as we go along the process, we keep focusing on the top bit and making sure that we got that right in terms of detail. All the blocks can be performed within a sprint duration, can assign to the team members. So the focus typically during the product backlog refinement is the top part of the backlog items. This is just one of the artifacts used to see what's going on in the project. A task board. Task board shows very simply the scope of items that are being worked on. What are the things to be worked on immediately? What are the work in progress? And what got done? So we put this up so everybody knows where we are at any point in time. So it's useful just as a matter of reporting to inform people what's going on. So burn down chart. I think everybody would have seen this before. Burn down chart essentially shows how much work to be done, how much time to get it done. It has to be, if you draw a straight line, you can see what is the expected rate of completing the work. If the actual work being done is below the line, we are working ahead of schedule. If the actual work is above the line, we are actually behind schedule. So this is just a quick indication to see where we are at in terms of progress in the project. And in the Scrum Agile process, there could be variations that come into the scope of work. So if there's variations, like maybe we have a bug that we didn't anticipate at the beginning, so the scope would have blown up. Or there's an extra requirement that came in from the stakeholders or the product owner, the scope would have blown up. So they could be reflected in this burn down chart below the zero line. And the impact of this additional work on the deadline, we can see by extrapolating this. You can see where, for example, in this case, we intended to release in early March. Now it becomes early April because there were a few things we didn't anticipate before. So this chart allows us to represent those changes that come along, and at least we can communicate this to the shareholders, the stakeholders or the product owner, what the impact of these changes are, as opposed to still being stuck despite all these variations, which is not really realistic. So another thing about the sprint planning would be sprint capacity. So when we plan for the sprint, the work to be done in the sprint, there has to be some buffer in case something goes wrong. So how do we work out the buffer? So typically, to work out the buffer, we just use past experience, how much interference has occurred in the previous sprints. We look at a few, and then we average it out. From there, we can work out what's the buffer to plan for the next sprint. So this is just an example. For example, the last 3 sprints, we have all these disturbances or unexpected events that cause the scope to be blown out. So we can measure it, average it, and then the next time we plan, we use the sprint capacity of 70% in this case. Okay, so this is just what we have gone through so far. What are these people doing? Scrum Master shields the team from interference. Once the sprint has been locked down, the scope is all the team is focusing on. The scope does not change. This is for the particular backlog, the sprint backlog for the particular sprint. The plans and facilities, so the Scrum Master is responsible for planning, facilitating the sprints. He facilitates the process improvements. The Scrum Master is responsible for removing impediments or coordinating the removal of impediments. The Scrum Master is responsible for establishing the Scrum environment. He knows the process, so he guides the rest of the team how to carry out the process. Product owner is on the business end of the project. He knows what's important, what's not, so he sets the sprint's priorities. Always available for the team to consult in terms of what's important, what's not. Compiles the backlog items. He owns the list of backlog items. Establishes a release plan, what is going to be released at the end of the project period. Refines the project backlog. That's the job of the product owner. And the developers, they're responsible for coordinating the tasks, predicting how much work to be done, and just provide daily updates on how the sprint is progressing. That's the role of the Scrum team. So that's pretty much, you can see in one page what it's all about. So in summary, I think this is pretty much the last line. In summary, what the whole thing is about. We want to have deliver business value to the team in the shortest cost, shortest time. And the way we do it, incremental delivery to minimize the risk. We do it by continuous improvement. We do it we give visibility to the stakeholders because we are engaged with the stakeholders throughout the project as opposed to the traditional method. And the teams are empowered. They know the process, they know what to do, so they assign themselves work. There's minimal, there's less supervision from someone in charge. So I think that's the last line I got. Yeah.
So, would you mind if we stopped recording
Yes.
for the questions then?
Yes.